Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk Bitcoin, a show for users new and old of cryptocurrencies and the current king of them all, Bitcoin. Coming up on today's show, Project Talk. Listener Daryl takes the first Horrible Warning of the Week award with his story about Bitfloor. The Antique Ox. We talk about everything Buttercoin. Promises, promises. PayPal weighs in on crypto and the latest great mining gear. Does anybody buy the hype? I sit down with David Perry of codinginmysleep.com for a heart-to-heart on Butterfly Labs. Is Bitcoin the way out of government corruption for third world countries? Mesh networks for rural cryptocurrency use, fact or fiction? And finally, correspondent Peter Dushinsky checks in on de-geekifying cryptography. To subscribe for free to our twice-weekly show, please visit us at letstalkbitcoin.com. You know, we haven't really talked about this yet, but Let's Talk Bitcoin runs entirely on Bitcoin donations and my out-of-pocket expenses. We have started accepting advertisers, but that's not really to a place based on the listener numbers where it's bringing in any money. If we can hit 1 Bitcoin of listener support per show, we'll be able to bring on a full-time associate who will join me in my task of hunting stories and conducting interviews, which means more and better content and more frequent releases of extra interviews on off-show days. So far, we've received 0.8 Bitcoins from a total of 6 donors for episode 1. Thank you very much. These larger donations are great, but it would be better if we had 100 listeners donating 0.01 Bitcoins than 10 listeners donating, 0.1 Bitcoins. So even if the amount you donate is only a little, please remember that with Bitcoin, there's no such thing as too small to matter. We're also looking at a membership or subscription model for extra and early content. The Saturday-Tuesday show will always be free, but we're looking for other ways to help the show support itself while giving listeners back value for their value. If you have ideas or suggestions about this, please email adam@letstalkbitcoin.com. And finally, if you can't support the show financially, you can still help us out quite a bit by sharing the show with anyone you think would or should be interested in the future of money. Let's Talk Bitcoin is released under an open source license, which allows for the non-commercial clipping, remixing, and posting in any format or to any site you want, so long as you include a link to our site, letstalkbitcoin.com. We're also actively recruiting both on and off-air talent for this and other shows to come. Once again, if you're interested, please contact me at adam@letstalkbitcoin.com. My name is Adam B. Levine. I'm a writer and speaker who likes to explain complicated topics in understandable terms. That's really what we're doing here, taking the complicated topic of cryptographically secured money and helping people see what it could mean in their own lives. Joining me in our quest for clarity are Andreas M. Antonopoulos, an expert in decentralized networks and secure systems.
Hi.
And Dr. Stephanie Murphy, a scientist and radio host.
Hi.
Thanks for taking the time out of your Saturday, everybody. Let's talk Bitcoin. One thing that I've definitely seen as we've kind of gotten to know the Bitcoin community more is that everybody has a project. This is not something where people get involved and they're like, oh, great, I've got a couple of Bitcoins now, so I'm kind of done with it. Most people who have been viewing this as an opportunity are building services and have really neat things that they're doing. I kind of wanted to set up a per-show instance of us talking about the projects that we're involved with, both for disclosure purposes and so that people can kind of figure out the other stuff that we're working on. Stephanie, I know you've got some projects. What's hot on your list right now?
Yeah, I have a ton of different projects, but I guess the one I want to focus on today is I'm a host of a nationally syndicated radio show called Free Talk Live, and I'm hosting the show on Sunday nights, but it's heard actually every single night of the week, and it's on terrestrial radio as well as XM and on the internet. You can check them out at freetalklive.com. They talk quite a bit about Bitcoins, actually, especially when I'm on the show.
And Andreas, you've had a couple of open source projects that have opened in the last couple of weeks. Which one do you think is your favorite right now?
The one that's getting a lot of traction is Open Bitcoin Store, which is on openbitcoinstore.com. And that's a community effort to help people create retail stores that buy and sell products and services in Bitcoin. Since it's a technically difficult area to work in, what we've done is created a simple store launch wizard where you just give a store name, an email address, and a password, and that's all. No credit cards, no personal information. You hit launch, and 20 seconds later, a full e-commerce store that takes Bitcoin. And you can just use it, and it's hosted for free. It has free technical support online for volunteers. That sounds like a pretty good proposition, and in fact, we got 60 store launches in just the first week, more than 140 applications so far, and about 10 stores are launched every day on that platform. We're very excited with the growth.
That sounds great to me, Andreas. I'd like to make one.
I actually already did. My project this week is actually Bitcoin packaging. My background before I got into this space was in the sale of industrial and institutional packaging supplies, which is not a super sexy topic, but as far as meeting the needs of businesses, that's kind of, I think, something that's going to need to pop up. I have relationships with brokers and things like that, so we're going to be offering all kinds of packaging for business needs exclusively for Bitcoin and actually at below market prices because we're, again, brokers, so we have the ability to get quite low prices.
That's exciting. And it could be sexy if you think about some of the dresses that Lady Gaga wears.
Thank you, Stephanie, for trying to help with the packaging pitch. I don't think that everybody was planning on going, but I know that now we're all planning on going to the Bitcoin conference coming up in San Jose next month. I'm giving a brief talk called YouTube is Broken, Rethinking Content Monetization with Bitcoin. And I know that you guys are doing some things too.
Yeah, I'm going to be there. And as I mentioned, I'm involved with Free Talk Live. They're going to be broadcasting live from the conference. And I'll be doing a live broadcast with Free Talk Live on Sunday night, almost as the conference is ending. And I'm also moderating a panel discussion about nonprofits and the Bitcoin world. So there's going to be several nonprofit organizations talking about the intersection between cryptocurrencies and how they can benefit charities and nonprofit organizations, and how nonprofits can benefit sort of the Bitcoin community or the Bitcoin world. There was recently a survey about Bitcoin users, and they said that the most common use of Bitcoins was actually for donations. But yet there's this reputation that people are just buying drugs online, and obviously that's not true. So we want to really play up the donation angle and talk about it some more.
That sounds superb, Stephanie. I would agree with your premise. This is a gift economy more so than anything else, and that's an interesting topic perhaps for another discussion. I'll also be at the show, and I'll be talking about Bitcoin neutrality. What are the prerequisites and necessary conditions for Bitcoin to be ready when that event happens? And I'll be talking about what that means, because I believe there will be several precipitating events that will lead to sudden and massive adoption of Bitcoin, at least in certain geographies. And so the topic is, how do you prepare for that? How do you make sure that Bitcoin is ready to be adopted in any culture, in any economic system, any geography, anywhere in the world?
So if you're going to be at the San Jose conference and you want to talk with us, absolutely send us an email at adam@letstalkbitcoin.com. After last week's Bitfloor closing, a listener named Daryl reached out to me. Not trusting Mt. Gox, he'd moved his trading to Bitfloor, and when things fell apart, he was caught in an awkward situation. He told me about it this morning.
Basically, I moved to Bitfloor because of the problems with Mt. Gox, and I wanted to find a more domestic place to trade. And unfortunately, I made the mistake a lot of nerds do as they're getting into Bitcoin and thinking suddenly I can be a day trader. Which actually kind of worked out fairly well initially. The problem was, I had done a sell and I was waiting for the buy order to fill, and just as it was about to fill, Bitfloor went down for about 3.5 hours, and when it came back online, it instantly shot up $20, which sucked. I started getting a little gun shy about the idea of day trading. One success and multiple failures were not making me happy. So what I did was I put in a limit order that was fairly high at the time. It was about $10 over what it was actually trading at. So my thought was, if it spikes up and fills that order and then spikes back down because it had been very volatile, I could just turn around and buy back. The day as I was watching it, suddenly the order filled and then trading stopped, which was weird. But as it turns out, the reason that the order filled is because some of Bitfloor's customers had been emailed indicating that they were going to shut down. Not me, but others had. And so what happened is the people who got the email immediately turned whatever cash they had at Bitfloor into Bitcoin, sailing through my sell order, because they can take Bitcoin and move it without anybody else's intervention. For my part, I wound up with a wad of cash that I can't do anything with. The bank shut down Bitfloor's account.
And now it's just kind of frozen there. Have they given you any sort of timeline on when that's going to change?
What they have announced is that the bank has mailed them a check. The problem is that if they can't find banking services to open an account with, to deposit the check and then turn around and disperse funds, I don't know when or how I'm going to get any of my money back, or if. Now, from all accounts, the person running Bitfloor is an honest operator, and I will probably get my money back, but I don't know when, because the banking system has decided to make that very, very difficult for him. But for me, this kind of underscores, so I'm likely to get my funds back sometime. The problem is that because they mailed the check to Bitfloor, and Bitfloor has to find a way to deposit the check because presumably the check is written out to Bitfloor, and you can't deposit or use a check to a company without opening an account under that company's name. And if he can't open an account anywhere under that company's name, how can he do anything with it? The last thing I heard was from April 20th, where the publicly displayed on the website was a message saying, they mailed us a check, we expect it within 10 days, and then we'll figure out how to get the money to you. At that point, hopefully he can open an account somewhere, wait for that check deposit to clear. Presumably it's certified funds, so that won't take long, and then find a way to get the money back to all of us through the banking system. That will take 3 to 5 days to clear back to my account, and then another 3 to 5 days for me to get it to, say, Dwolla, another 3 to 5 days to get from Dwolla to some exchange where I can actually use it. All in all, it's basically meant that I've had no access to my money for, by the time this is done, say a month.
Assuming everything goes well, into plan as they have it right now. I mean, if things change, then that could even stretch out longer.
Right. Meanwhile, everybody who had converted their funds to Bitcoin has them now. They're immediately liquid. And
right.
To me, this is just a story that underscores 2 or 3 times how Bitcoin is so much better than our current banking system.
One of the things that's kind of been a theme, and I think is going to be a theme moving forward, is that in this unregulated environment, and by unregulated I mean, the rules are kind of subject to change at any time, not of the currency itself, but of how the currency is being handled and how the businesses are handling it, things like that. If you can't be a shining example, at least be a horrible warning. So, yeah. I mean, what do you think the takeaway is for somebody who's hearing this, and what mistakes would you do differently next time, knowing what you know now?
Well, my plan going forward is to take what funds that I have from this, what I can recover, probably move them to an exchange where I can turn it back into Bitcoin, or possibly just use local Bitcoins to do it, although the prices there tend to be wildly varying from the actual market price. Take my Bitcoins home and hold them. I don't see much of a reason to trust either exchanges or the banking systems in between us and the exchanges at this point.
Do you think that day trading is something that you'll do again in Bitcoin?
No. It's the common nerd mistake to think that you're good at all things intellectual, and day trading is sort of an intellectual exercise in some respects, but I've found that it doesn't. I found that I'm not good at it.
Yeah, it just doesn't translate that well. I'm familiar with this too.
I've spoken to other people in a similar situation where it's like, yeah, I tried day trading a little bit and found out very quickly that it's not good for me.
I think a lot of times people try to look at it, they try to apply logical standards to the markets. And I think that's where at least I've run into problems personally. I day traded very briefly, maybe a year ago in Bitcoin. And that was the problem I had, is that if you have an unpredictable market, then it's very difficult to predict the market. You can predict volatility, but that's a dangerous game to play if it goes against you.
Exactly. My ability to predict how code works and how systems work does not translate well to how markets work.
Right. Daryl, thanks for taking the time to sit down with us and share your experience with this kind of Bitfloor mess. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for listening.
If I showed you a website where you could easily purchase electronics from the world's largest distributor with Bitcoins at 0% markup, would you think it was too good to be true? Good news, it's real, and it's at bitcoinstore.com. Choose from 500,000 items, save money over Amazon and Newegg, and convert your Bitcoins to real-world items. You can even buy with privacy. All they need is a shipping address. But don't take my word for it. See for yourself at bitcoinstore.com.
Adam, one of the things that I find fascinating about Bitcoin is a lot of the people who join this are really idealists, and sometimes they have this naive audacity, and they try to solve problems that people believe are not solvable, and that's how you succeed. So one of the latest projects that exhibited that kind of attitude that I really got excited about is Buttercoin. And what Buttercoin is an attempt to build an exchange that performs a ton better than the existing exchanges, that is completely open source, and that can handle an order book and order capacity volume in the tens of thousands of operations per second, rather than the current tens of transactions per minute that seems to be the ceiling. This is an effort really to write a stock exchange. It started with a single individual saying, I've had enough of all of these problems. Meet me in my apartment tomorrow, and just waited to see who came. lots of people showed up. That started a project where teams of people working 24 hours a day round the clock, swapping from geography to geography. As soon as people finished here, people in Germany were waking up, and then people in Japan were waking up after that. And the work has continued for almost 2 weeks nonstop. The results are pretty impressive. And we're going to be doing some interviews and follow-up shows to talk about performance results and where this project is heading. But it's a very, very exciting project.
Hey, Andreas, can I ask you a question? I made a post about Buttercoin in one of the Bitcoin groups that I'm a part of online. Somebody responded, is that when you see a woman that you're interested in and you think everything about her is attractive except her coin that she uses?
That's terrible.
It was, but I'm seriously wondering, why is it called Buttercoin?
The transactions flow smooth as butter. The idea is to make it frictionless, right? Frictionless commerce, frictionless transactions, and to have an exchange that just flows. So soft, silky, smooth, and not friction.
So even this early in this project, they've had pretty incredible results in terms of just the amount of trades that they've been able to execute, in their test markets. And the rate, I mean, like you said, we're talking hundreds of transactions, thousands of transactions per second versus tens of transactions per second with the current status quo system. Do you think that Mt. Gox is going to survive this if an open source architecture is released that makes them look like a horse-drawn carriage compared to this new fiat?
I think they will survive. In fact, Adam, 3 days after the initiation of this project, I downloaded the sample code and ran it on my Mac Air laptop and achieved about 300,000 transactions a minute on my laptop. And obviously that's not a scale system, but it's an indication that they started on the right foot with no optimization. Just from the architecture, you have an emergent scale that is 2 to 3 orders of magnitude higher than that of existing exchange. What's exciting about Buttercoin is not the idea that someone will take this and build one exchange. What's exciting about it is that with this, 100 exchanges can be built in 100 different countries, and that will create a broad base of high volume, capable, resilient exchanges. So people can move on to solving the problems of regulatory compliance and banking laws instead of trying to build an exchange on PHP and MySQL, which, we know how that ends.
So I'm kind of wondering what features, if any, are built into Buttercoin to provide security or to protect against DDoS attacks.
The main concept behind it is to create a resilient architecture that scales out horizontally, where different components can be separated. There's a very big effort to do separation of concerns. That means that if you attack the front end, you're really only taking down the front end. It's not related to the exchange trading engine, to the order matching engine, of which, of course, there are many collaborating instances. So the whole idea is you have an architecture where you could take out one piece of the system with a DDoS, but it would just spawn another. It's applying whack-a-mole from the mole's perspective.
So there's been a lot of talk in the Bitcoin community recently about comments made by the CEO over at PayPal, which has said that they're looking at Bitcoin and they think it's very interesting. And so people have taken this as kind of that means that they're going to adopt it. And that's not really how I read the situation. Andreas, what do you think about the PayPal comments?
I'm not too sure what to make of it at the moment. They were really talking about using it as a funding mechanism more so than anything else. It will be interesting to see if they exchange Bitcoin for fiat within that funding equation, because that would really make them an exchange, and a robust one at that, which would be an interesting entry into the market. But again, I don't think that's what they were talking about. I think really it's just, hey, this is interesting. We heard about it. We may look into it. And beyond that, really, who knows? But the other part of this that's interesting is that we're looking at PayPal now as a legacy banking institution, and it's only 15 years old.
For so many people who use Bitcoin, they're excited about it because it allows them to get around some of the worst things about something like PayPal, which, PayPal was wonderful 15 years ago when it came out. It's a way to send payments online and, relatively secure. A lot of people use it. But with Bitcoin, you don't have to pay these high fees that PayPal has. Nobody's going to lock down your account or confiscate it, which can happen with PayPal. And you don't have the risk of chargebacks, which is also a big problem for people who sell with PayPal. So if PayPal integrates Bitcoin, are they just going to integrate all of those features that people don't like about PayPal into Bitcoin, basically? Does it kind of defeat the purpose? Although I guess I'm a little bit mixed on this, because I know that if PayPal adopts Bitcoin, it'll probably be great promotion for Bitcoin, and it'll get people more comfortable with using Bitcoin that weren't before.
I think the advantage that PayPal brings to the table when it comes to online payments is that it's an online payment system that interfaces well with the US dollar. And it interfaces well with a couple other currencies too. Bitcoin is, on its face, a competitor to PayPal, not something that's complementary, because everything that PayPal does, Bitcoin does better, except that interface with the US dollar. So when I see anybody talking about something like this, put yourself in their perspective. Clearly, it would be a bad thing for PayPal if adoption of Bitcoin became pervasive around the world. I just have to think that this is something where they're acknowledging it so that at a later point they can say, you know, we looked into that and it's just not for us. It's just not safe enough. However they want to portray it. I mean, if you think about it strategically, that's the way I think that you would want to approach this if you're a competitor of Bitcoin.
I think they have 3 or 4 years during which they can continue to say that. But in the end, I think this announcement is actually more akin to Blockbuster getting into the business of digital video distribution. They had to, because they had no choice. And in the end, it made no difference. Bye-bye, Blockbuster.
Bye-bye, PayPal.
So 250 gigahashes per second is the new gold standard for mining speeds. Do you guys even think this exists? I mean, we're still waiting on the 5 gigahash ones to come out from Butterfly Labs.
I'll coin a new term, fanware. That's where you have a box of fans and nothing much more. Let's see if it is fanware or not.
So there's a company called KNC Miner. They've announced that they have these units that are called the Mars and the Venus or something like that. They're named after planets, or the Jupiter, Mars and Jupiter. And the Jupiter one goes up to 250 gigahash per second. I mean, that would basically blow the current technologies, even the ASICs that haven't yet even shipped, out of the water. But the question is this real, and will they be able to live up to their promise, or are they just talking big? And I am super, super skeptical. Every ASIC that we've seen come out so far has been different than originally planned. It seems like there are a lot of unforeseen things, but who knows? Maybe KNC Miner has already done some testing. They just aren't talking about it, and they really do have the ability to deliver this.
I just hope that people can take away, you know, some lessons from the people who are stuck in BFL products and make sure that if you want to buy something, you don't pre-order it with Bitcoin. If you're going to pre-order it with dollars. If you just want to wait to pay with Bitcoin until it's actually available, then do that. But pre-ordering is a bad idea because in a volatile currency, you're going to wind up feeling real stupid either way.
Let's look at what Moore's Law tells us about this situation. If you assume that people who are building ASICs know how to build the algorithms and they've squeezed out most of the optimization they can get out of that, then essentially we're tied to Moore's Law. So if you're building 6 to 10 gigahash per second rigs today, in 18 months we should expect the same level of chip technology to have either decreased in price by half or double the capacity for transistors. So essentially we are at 12 to 20 gigahashes per second. I don't see a 6 to 250 rise in that period of time. So what that tells us is either they found a better way to implement the algorithm in an ASIC. It's a revolutionary or a technology upgrade rather than a simple capacity upgrade due to Moore's Law.
Yeah, there hasn't been too much detail about these Jupiter units, only that they cost $7,000 on the pre-order. So people are really putting a lot of faith into these things. And I can understand, like, I'm kind of tempted to fall prey to wishful thinking, essentially, and not apply the proper skepticism, because the evidence we've seen so far with Butterfly Labs and with other companies is that they just haven't shipped, you know. I could see how a lot of people are going to get really excited about these miners, but the proof is in the pudding, and they don't have it yet.
It's these painful experiences that are going to teach the community kind of who's real and who's not, but it's a very painful experience that has to teach us what's going on. It's a good thing and a bad thing about Bitcoin. I actually talked with David Perry, the first guy to get his hands on one of the BFL units, who did not pre-order one, incidentally. They sent it to him because he had been unbiased in his coverage of them, which I thought was really interesting. And so we had a good conversation about this. Hey, so we're here with David Perry, the first man on Earth to have his hands on a BFL unit. David, what do you think?
Well, I think technically the people inside BFL had their hands on it before me, but No, to my knowledge, the only ones that have ever been seen outside of BFL were the ones that they shipped Jeff to write BFG Miner around, and I don't even know. I think he might have actually gone into their facilities to do that, so you might be right. It's been hashing along just fine, 5.5 gigahash on average. It's not nearly as noisy as the video made it out to be. I just have kind of a cheap camera and it picks up certain frequencies more than others.
Let's talk a little bit of background for a second. How long have you been mining not on ASICs?
My extremely patient wife allowed me to have a mid to large scale. It was 14 Radeon 5830s back when Bitcoin was climbing up to 30. We kind of wiped out in the crash, and I ended up selling my GPUs off to get an FPGA unit just because, like, at that point, it wasn't necessarily the most intelligent move to make going to FPGA. I'm very glad I did it in retrospect, but that was still when everyone was kind of saying, no, FPGAs aren't really worth it unless your electricity is very expensive, which I live in Las Vegas. We've got Hoover Dam. Electricity is very cheap here.
Right.
But I went to FPGA just to appease my wife. And I'm very glad that I did because that's the way everything went. And now everything's going ASIC. I'm very surprised at this point to actually hear my wife saying, so when is Butterfly Labs going to ship you the next one?
So when we're talking about the crash, you're talking about not this latest adjustment or crash.
No, the crash from 30.
Right, the crash from 30. So we're talking about last year. So last year you sold most of your units and converted to FPGA. Is that right?
That is correct.
In the amount of time you've been mining, do you have any idea of how many coins you've mined?
I bounced around a little bit here and there, but I'm seeing about 140 or so.
Okay, that's pretty good. And you mined for a year and a half?
I did. I mined for, about that.
So now that you've got this ASIC unit, ASICs are supposedly the pinnacle of computing power that's targeted towards the mining process. Is that about right?
That sounds about right. Basically, what we're talking about is we're moving from the least specialized to the most specialized hardware. In the very beginning, it was all CPUs. It was just, your computer processor that's built to do things. We went to GPUs that are built to do slightly fewer things, and then FPGAs that are sort of like a chip that you can program to pretend to be any other kind of chip. So we programmed them to pretend to be Bitcoin ASICs, essentially. But they're never even close to being as efficient as an actual ASIC. And now we've moved on to actual ASICs. So, it's the more you specialize, the more efficient you get. And this is as specialized as it gets. It's a chip that does 2 rounds of SHA-256 hashing, and that's all it does. That's all it will ever do. In this old miner, if something happened to Bitcoin, I could probably tear him off the board and repurpose him for, real-time video effects or something. But that ASIC's only good for the one thing ever, but it is really, really good at it.
So with that in mind, has it been different, mining with the ASIC versus mining with your conventional equipment, like the general purpose stuff? Is there a difference in process?
Not from the FPGA. Moving from FPGA to ASIC, it's basically identical. Moving from GPU to FPGA, it's a little bit different, if no other reason, just because a lot of the really super user-friendly graphical interface type software doesn't support FPGAs and ASICs yet. I would expect that in the near future that they would, but a lot of the pretty front ends that the newer users who are just mining on graphics cards, maybe in a computer they already owned, are comfortable with. But if you're going from FPGA to ASIC, it is zero friction. It is the exact same process from the software side. It's the exact same process from the hardware, the drivers. The exact same USB serial port drivers that were in use on the FPGA are also in use on the ASIC.
What about the difference from someone who isn't mining at all to going in? Because I thought that part of the advantage of the ASIC as offered by BFL was that they were kind of plug-and-play units. Is that an inaccurate assessment that I've made?
My understanding is that in the extreme near future, they're going to be plug-and-play units. Butterfly Labs, when they sent me this ASIC at the time, the version of BFG Miner that supports this particular piece of hardware was so brand new that they had to explicitly send me an experimental build. And that software is the back end of a lot of the friendlier pieces of software. Once that software is perfected, it should be a pretty trivial process for them to roll it into things like Easy Miner and CG Miner and all the pretty friendly graphical front ends that the newbies will be more comfortable with. A lot of this stuff is probably going to be a little more difficult than was intended, but I think a lot of that is just the incredible newness of all of it. Aside from Avalon, no one's really done this before. So there are a lot of stumbling blocks that you won't know you're going to hit until you hit them.
Now, you said that you went from your conventional mining, which is to say general purpose computers, to FPGAs. Did you pre-order any Butterfly Labs products?
Actually, I was too flat broke to pre-order any products from anyone. I would have if I had had the money, and I probably would have pre-ordered from Avalon as well if I had had the money. I would have pre-ordered from everybody if I had the money. I'm just in the process of buying a house now, and when you buy a house, all of your free money disappears.
Yeah, I know how that goes. So you didn't order any product from BFL, but you're one of the first people out there with an actual working unit. How'd you wrangle that?
Honestly, at this point, they probably feel like they owe me a little bit for all of the flack that I've taken for the crime of fair and balanced reporting. I've written a few pieces on them over the last year or two. Specifically, there was one I wrote about Sonny Vlicides, who's one of the people on the board. He's not like the head guy, but he's up there. And it came out that he had a little bit of sort of a checkered past, and I just did an interview with him. I tried to keep the interview fair and balanced, and I posted everything that he gave me permission to anyway, exactly as it happened in context with the questions. And an amazing flame fest ensued. I've been accused of being Sonny. I've been accused of being a shill. I've been called all kinds of lovely names, and it absolutely has not stopped since. To this day, I'm still accused of these things, and I kind of feel like it's a combination of maybe they feel bad for me, and also they know that I'm going to give a fair and balanced story no matter what happens in the comments section afterwards.
Well, it seems like you're on the sidelines on this one, and so you kind of have the advantage of not being involved with it because, like you said, you couldn't afford to pre-order at the time. Let me ask you this. If you had pre-ordered, would you still feel the same way about BFL that you do now?
I don't know. As a journalist, I keep everything as compartmentalized as I can. I don't let anything affect my writing, at the very least. My feelings are a more personal matter. I don't know that I would feel the same way if I had had a dog in this fight. I'd probably be a lot more upset about the delays than I am. I'll totally admit to that. If I were actually waiting this whole time for an ASIC and especially watching the price of Bitcoin rise this whole time, I probably would be a lot more upset about the delays than I am. That's purely an emotional thing. I really try not to let that bleed into anything professional.
Having seen kind of how this has gone, I think that there's a larger lesson to take from this, kind of the advisability of pre-orders with regards to Bitcoin purchases, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
I think it really depends on the mindset of the person who's placing the pre-order. If you're the kind of person like me who I try my best to think of the contents of my wallet in terms of the coins themselves and not necessarily in terms of their US dollar or euro or whatever value, because that helps actually spend it like money. If you always think, well, what could happen tomorrow? The price might go up. Then you'll never spend your coins. You'll just end up hoarding in this whole big experiment that we're all participating in. From your perspective, at least, will fail because you'll just have this store of value that you never actually use the value you've stored. That said, I think just as plausible that you could spend Bitcoins on a pre-order and then the value could tank. It can go both ways. If you're the kind of person who's going to spend a bunch of coins on something now, and then if the price doubles before you actually get the thing, you're going to feel bad about it and feel like you spent twice as much about the thing, yeah, don't pre-order. You're just going to make yourself crazy.
Isn't it kind of a lose-lose situation, though? Because like you said, if the price tanks, the customer won't be upset, but the vendor might not be able to do their project. I mean, if they were relying on a certain amount, unless they're literally cashing them out as soon as they receive them, it just seems like you're setting yourself up to lose in so many situations, especially since you're talking about something that you don't really know the release date of. You know, I mean, I understand what you're saying about you need to spend Bitcoins like money, but at the same time, I think there's a differentiation between spending money on something you're going to use pretty immediately with Bitcoin. That makes sense to me because then the value that you are receiving is tied to the value that you are giving at the time that it's happening. But when you talk about pre-orders, you're talking about value given in advance that might be worth something later or might be worth something completely different. And the longer out that is, the more certain you are that whatever you're getting, you're either getting way too good of a deal or not good enough of a deal. There are all these reasons to not ever accept pre-orders unless you absolutely 1,000,000% know exactly the day it's going to release.
I think that might be a pretty valid lesson. I will say, though, that on the business side of the fence, you have to be a little more pragmatic and guarded than on the client side. And my advice just there was more for the end users. Businesses, I totally understand businesses needing to avoid that kind of volatility and cashing out the moment the coins come in. I mean, there's a reason that's basically the default option in BitPay.
In October of last year, BFL basically, when it was becoming clear that they weren't going to hit their release date, they made a statement saying that they were going to donate 1,000 Bitcoins to charity if, when they finally did release, they didn't hit their power goals. I watched your video, and it looked like they didn't hit their power goals. Do you think that it's even fair for the community to hold them to that standard?
I don't really know that much about this entire thing. I know that a bet was made.
Well, it wasn't a bet. It wasn't a bet. It was they said, we're sorry, we failed, so what we're going to do is this. And it wasn't a bet. It was just like a statement that they, volunteered.
Gotcha. So it's more like a pledge than a bet.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
It's more like a pledge than a bet. That's correct.
If you make a statement like that, you should probably own up to it. I don't know all the details surrounding it, but if that's, if those were the actual words as they were uttered, then yeah, I think they should be held to that. Don't make promises that you won't keep.
Do you think that that's true even if it's something that comes at the cost of them being able to do business? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out where the winning scenario is in really any of these relationships that BFL has started up, because it seems like they keep doing things that are shooting them in the foot the longer that they go.
I think what we're seeing with BFL is it's the same sort of curve at each release, but it gets a little bit steeper each time because this is just kind of round two. I don't know if you were around for the FPGA release for their original product. It was a very similar story. They showed up and everyone, including the people who were currently making the then very experimental FPGA miners, said all the same sorts of things that they said about the ASICs. This doesn't exist. It's going to be vapor aware. It breaks the laws of thermodynamics. That's my favorite, by the way. Just people saying it would never be a product. Basically, the exact same thing happened. They missed their release date, they oversold a bit, they underdelivered a bit, and in the end, once they got past all those little stumbling blocks and shortcomings, they had a decent product that a lot of people bought and were totally happy with. And I kind of see that as the future for the ASIC. I think Butterfly Labs makes their money, keeps their customers happy, and has a decent public image in between product releases. Between releases, they have really good products that everybody loves and buys and enjoys. It just seems to be something about that initial release process that, there's something in there that they haven't quite nailed down yet.
If there's one thing that people can take away from the Butterfly Labs experience, it would be expectation management is super duper important. Because you're right, Butterfly Labs has succeeded in releasing product, and they probably will release these ASICs. I mean, you've got one in hand, so you got to imagine that, they're going to be releasing them sometime soon. They have a success. They're the first ones out with a user-targeted product that is, to spec, as they've said, and yet it's kind of viewed as a failure by a lot of people, just because, they've blown the deadline that they set for themselves so many times. So again, you shoot yourself in the foot. What do you think about the kind of rush of pre-orders? Because the pre-order process has now gone on for almost a year, the amount of units that are going to be going out that have already been paid for is a pretty huge amount. And, the estimates that I'm seeing put the initial run at something like 10 to 20 times of what the network hash rate is right now. That's obviously a huge increase. It seems to me that if they had stopped accepting pre-orders or released on time and then, sold units after that, then this wouldn't have been that big a deal because the people who bought in early would, be getting their units and they'd be able to mine forward with them and the difficulty would go up, but it wouldn't be that bad. The situation we have now where there are almost, like 10 months or 11 months worth of pre-orders stacked up, doesn't that mean that as soon as the mass release happens, pretty much everybody is going to have terrible returns because the hash rate will go up so much that
I've always said that the safest view to take in any investment you're going to make is the most pessimistic one. The missing link, though, that keeps the real most pessimistic view from quite meshing with what you just described is that Butterfly Labs does not have infinite production capacity.
Right.
If they were able to get like all 6 wafers that they burned in and ship out 6 wafers worth of products the next day all at once, you're absolutely right. It would just crash everything and everyone would be screwed who ordered their products. They don't have that kind of production capacity. They can churn out a lot of these things, but not at that rate. It's going to take quite a while for them to actually reach people, get plugged in, start hashing, saturate the network. I expect that we're in for a pretty dramatic increase in hash rate in the near future, but I don't think it's going to be quite as fast as everyone imagined. I mean, I know we're going to max out the factor of 4 that the network can adjust for at any one retarget. I know we're going to see a lot of those factor of 4 retargets.
I didn't realize there was a factor of 4 limitation in there. I thought it was just whatever it's just the difficulty divided by the amount of power, right?
It is that in most circumstances, but there is an upper and lower bound that the client won't break. It won't adjust upwards or downwards by more than a factor of 4. So you can't do anything more than multiply the current difficulty by 4 or divide it by 4.
Oh, well, that's an interesting check.
If you double the hash power, that also means that blocks are happening every 5 minutes instead of 10, so that 2016 blocks between retargets is going to fly by in a week instead of 2.
So now that you've had the unit for a week, do you have an idea of what your daily rate is? I mean, in terms of how many Bitcoins you're generating with it?
There's a little bit of variance. I mean, there always is a little bit of variance with Bitcoin mining, but it seems to be between 0.25 and 0.3 coins a day.
0.25 and 0.3 coins a day. Okay, we're going to check back with you 2 weeks after BFL releases, and we're going to see what that rate is then.
I fully expect it to nosedive, and
I expect it to nosedive too, but the question is, does it go from 0.25, 0.3 to 0.025, 0.03, to 0.01, 0.00. I mean, like, I don't know what the multiple is going to wind up being by the time all this sorts out, but I'm super curious to see. Because, again, this is totally an experiment, And as more of this mining equipment gets out there, we're distributing the hashing power out more into the network so there are more players. I mean, from a infrastructure standpoint, it's actually really exciting. It's just from an individual miner reward standpoint, that's what I'm wondering is how much are people actually going to be making given the rollout of ASIC? So I guess we're just going to have to wait and see.
I will make one minor prediction, though. Every time we switch technologies, there seems to be something very much resembling a bubble with the hash rate. You see it climb at a ridiculous, unsustainable rate. It gets to a certain point, it crashes, overcorrects, dip, a bunch of people pack up and go home, and it restabilizes to a reasonable hash rate.
Well, that makes sense. That's just the network doing what it does. People getting excited, then realizing, oh man, there's not enough reward in this. What the heck am I doing? And then, they quit and it goes back up. That's a great system. I love it. To see more of David Perry's work, visit him at codinginmysleep.com.
Foxycart.com is a better checkout experience, empowering developers to create flexible, powerful, custom e-commerce in less time, while equipping merchants with the fastest checkout flow available to their customers. Foxycart is built for web professionals. It can serve as a foundation for advanced custom e-commerce deployments or for quick and easy, single-product online stores. And of course, Foxycart supports Bitcoin. Visit foxycart.com to learn more.
So, guys, the other day on Facebook, I saw that somebody I knew of in a Bitcoin group was posting about a liberty and entrepreneurship camp that's going to be going on in Africa. And the goal of that is to teach people about entrepreneurship and try to get some economic uplifting going on through, teaching people to start their own businesses. And now in a lot of parts of Africa right now, there's this really popular payment system that works on cell phones called M-Pesa, and it works by text messaging, I think. It doesn't require smartphones or anything, but it's like super common because everybody has access to these cell phones, and they often use it to make small payments. So I'm really wondering if Bitcoin could really catch on in Africa, and if it could be a way to help people get out of poverty, to develop their businesses, and if this would be something that's just totally ripe for Bitcoin.
I think that especially in a third world situation, there's a lot of opportunity there because the problem with small currencies, and in a lot of these African countries you have small currencies, is that they're kind of easily controlled. Mostly they're backed against the US dollar, But ultimately, if the government decides that they want to do something, then you have a situation emerge like Zimbabwe, where they just say, okay, well, rather than, control our finances, we're just going to start printing and devalue the money. So in that circumstance, I think that Bitcoin offers freedom from that sort of financial tyranny, where it doesn't really matter what your local government does, doesn't really matter what, if they're in trouble, and so they think that it's important to devalue the currency. Ultimately, nobody can devalue the currency. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of room there, but we have to get to a point where the usability is as simple as being able to operate on an old style cell phone, and have it just be easy.
I guess if M-Pesa is working for a lot of people in places like Africa, then maybe they'll keep on using it unless they're persuaded that Bitcoin is somehow better. And maybe that comes in because it's not a fiat currency and it's not being controlled by these centralized governments that are often really corrupt and a huge barrier, frankly, to people getting out of poverty. There's also this idea of mesh networks. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this, but it's the technology that basically you can create kind of a local internet. The nodes are connected to one another, and they are not necessarily connected to the greater internet. And this could be really useful in areas where internet access is not very widespread. And so that could be a means of trading Bitcoins or exchanging Bitcoins in areas that are very rural without much internet access. I'm picturing people downloading the blockchain, from the from the Bitcoin QT client in a place in Africa where their internet is like really spotty or non-existent, and it just doesn't seem to work to me. But, maybe mesh networks could sort of take care of some of that, or other solutions know about yet. But I think it's really important for us as people who are interested in Bitcoin in places like the US to try to help other people around the world see the value in Bitcoin, and they could even use it for their own empowerment.
Several years ago, I heard Nicholas Negroponte from MIT's Media Lab discussing mesh networks, and he provided a really nice visual, which was these really operate the way a lily operates in a lily pond. Essentially, if you look at the lily pond, you have a surface that's covered with these leaves of the lilies. And what you don't see underneath is that only a few of those actually have stalks that go down and get nutrients from the bottom. And you could traverse the entire surface of that pond just jumping from lily pad to lily pad. And the same thing applies here. If you had a mesh network to support Bitcoin, you would only need a couple of strategic points that sync back into the blockchain that enable full node clients. And then the rest of the network, then that closed economy, could operate on lightweight clients. So I think the mesh networking idea has a lot to offer.
Yeah, that's a really great analogy. I can understand it better, actually, just from hearing that.
Mesh networks have been a hot topic for the last 2 or 3 years. What made a lot of people think about them was the Arab Spring, where internet was shut down in a variety of areas, and so there was no way to coordinate on social media because there was no social media connection. In situations like that, where you have no other option, mesh networking makes a ton of sense. But what I've seen in general is that when people try to enact these situations and create these circumstances for mesh networking in the first world sort of scenario, people just aren't that interested, and so it kind of tends to not happen. I watched the Freedom Box project for a number of years, and they were all about building a simple, essentially, box you could just plug into a wall wart, and it would be its own little base station, and then it would connect to all other base stations within its range and create this sort of ad hoc mesh network. But things kind of fall apart. The idea is there, but the technology to enable it, for whatever reason, is apparently hard to achieve, because I don't think it's been done successfully yet in any sort of a pervasive fashion.
I wonder if any of these altcoins could be more appropriate for certain situations. I'm thinking of one in particular. I've been looking into a lot of the altcoins because I think it's interesting, but a lot of them have these like built-in economic principles that I don't necessarily agree with. For instance, there's one which is a demurrage currency, which means there's a fee if you don't spend it. And so it's meant to, quote, prevent hoarding. But what that means is it discourages saving. The people who made this coin are associated with like the Occupy movement, and they seem to have these like explicitly Marxist kind of economic ideas. Maybe something like that might suit certain places better. Maybe another altcoin could solve some of the problems that might be inherent with Bitcoin, like the larger blocks or the confirmation time on something like a mesh network. I guess we're just going to have to see, and we're going to have to see which coins emerge and which ones meet the need of people the best.
I think that's a really good point. We haven't talked about altcoins yet But I think that we're going to, for Tuesday's episode, if you guys are into that, we've been getting a lot of requests to talk about them. Basically, if you don't know what an altcoin is, so Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, but there are a whole bunch of other cryptocurrencies. And so the difference is that each one has its own set of rules and its own blockchain. And again, the blockchain is just this long ledger, essentially, that keeps track of who owns what for everybody. So each type of cryptocurrency has its own blockchain, and because of that, we call them alt chains or altcoins.
The altcoins are all based on the Bitcoin source code because it's open source and anybody can check it out. And then usually somebody changes something or tweaks something to create a difference in whatever altcoin that they're interested in creating that will maybe add something or have a different characteristic than Bitcoin. So a lot of the altcoins maybe have different sizes of the blocks, or the blocks are generated more frequently or less frequently, or the difficulty of the network adjusts more frequently than Bitcoin, or they have some other feature built in like this demurrage fee with the coins that I was talking about before. Or there's even a coin where the network is created based on proof of stake rather than proof of work. So instead of by doing these calculations to create the network like Bitcoin does, the people who hold the most coins are creating the network. So there are all kinds of different changes. You know, honestly, at this point, not many of them have seen a lot of widespread interest and adoption. I think there are a lot of people who are regretful that they missed the boat on Bitcoins and that they didn't get into Bitcoin soon enough. They wish they had invested more energy and perhaps capital into Bitcoin when it was first coming out and they were really cheap, right? So they are looking for another alternative, like the next Bitcoin, essentially. And maybe there are also some people who are open to the idea even that Bitcoin is not ideal, you know, that maybe there's another coin that has better characteristics that would make it more widely usable and people would like that coin more than Bitcoin. And that remains to be seen because so far Bitcoin is definitely the most popular, but I think it's something that the market has to work out. Nobody really knows the answer to that. We'll just see as time goes on.
So when somebody creates a new cryptocurrency, basically what they're doing is they're saying, okay, well, I like the concept behind Bitcoin, except for this one thing. Are there currencies out there right now that are changing a whole bunch of things, or is it in general like they identify the one thing that they don't like about Bitcoin and change that?
In general, I think there are a few things, but there's like one major thing that's different with each of these coins. You know, often they'll play with the number of coins, you know, like there's 21 million Bitcoins and there might be 10 times as many coins on one of the alt chains or one of the altcoins. Sometimes they play with the block size or the time to adjust the difficulty. Usually there's like one big defining feature. That's how I look at it anyway.
One of the things I love about altcoins is that they represent essentially an ecosystem. And that ecosystem is evolving. And it's evolving according to certain fitness functions. Right now, the fitness function is alternative currencies that are more popular or as Stephanie said, solve a specific problem. But what would be really interesting is if the fitness function changed and it became survivability from government shutdown or survivability for government intrusion. That fitness function was applied very effectively over the last decade in the gradual evolution of peer-to-peer. So as each service was slapped down and knocked down, the next service solved exactly the problem that allowed the previous service to be shut down until, of course, BitTorrent, which now is pretty much unstoppable. I love that because what it means is every time you cut off the head of one part of these solutions, something else pops up. So you have this real-time evolution that is driven essentially by a fitness function that could be government intrusion. And that makes altcoins the most resilient aspect of the Bitcoin ecosystem.
The existence of so many altcoins that do utilize this peer-to-peer function that, like you're saying, Andreas, protects against government shutdown and intrusion, I think that's an indication that the Bitcoin concept handles that pretty well, you know, because nobody's really changing that particular feature.
There's no need. In times of crisis, things work differently. And back to the discussion we were having about mesh networking, it's very difficult to apply that in the first world. Until you have a hurricane situation or something like that, we've seen very successful implementations of mesh network cell phone services with, the lily pad phenomenon. Again, you have most of them jumping between towers, and only a few of the towers are actually connected because of a crisis. So a crisis always precipitates rapid evolution and innovation to overcome it, and that's where you have opportunity for new things to arise.
Well, I look forward to continuing our conversation on the next episode about the altcoins. I think that we should definitely make some time in Tuesday's episode to talk about that. If you as a listener have ideas or a favorite altcoin that you think that we should talk about, definitely email us at adam@letstalkbitcoin.com. So I think that about wraps up the time we have for today. Thanks for joining me, both Stephanie and Andreas.
Thank you. This was so much fun.
Thank you.
So new correspondent to Let's Talk Bitcoin, Peter Dashensky, joins me. When you talk about de-geekifying crypto, are you talking about like breaking down the terminology, or are you talking about like we need to take the software side, the side that people interact with every day to use it and make it, add usability?
It's both. It's both of those. De-geekifying crypto as we enter phase 2 of Bitcoin, the post-geek era, you might call it. It's about the user experience, and it's also about communication. The popular acceptance thing is ultimately what's going to drive the regulatory thing. These pieces are all interconnected. So as much as we need to engage with Securities and Exchange Commissions and our elected representatives, they're ultimately responsible to and ultimately influenced by the general public, and the general public needs to have this communicated to them in a clear and concise way as we kind of bring this forward. Some of that will come just be a matter of familiarity as Bitcoin continues to build momentum, as media exposure increases. I think that this can only go forward, but it can go forward in many different ways. It can go forward with a real sense of fear. We have an opportunity and a responsibility to really clarify the message. Taking this very complex, very amazing, very incredible, revolutionary idea and making it so that your 13-year-old niece and your 80-year-old grandmother can get their heads around it without, sitting down and watching like a lecture series in a university lecture theater. This can be made to be simple and accessible. How do we make our cell phones easy to use and feel safe? If our cell phones are essentially going to be our wallets and our banks, how do we keep our Bitcoin safe? How do we keep our cryptocurrencies secure? It's definitely an avenue that needs to be pursued and explored as well.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 2 of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Whether you liked, loved, or hated the show, we want to hear what you think. Please send all listener feedback, comments, or questions to adam@letstalkbitcoin.com. If you're like me and just can't get enough information and perspective on Bitcoin, check out our daily newspaper at thedailybitcoin.com, where you'll find the best news presenting articles and arguments from all sides of the issue. Stay tuned for episode 3 of Let's Talk Bitcoin, releasing late Tuesday, the 30th of April. Thanks to Paul Hughes, Andreas M. Antonopoulos, Dr. Stephanie Murphy, David Perry, and Peter Dashensky for providing the content for this show. Music for this episode was provided by Jared Rubens, Nathaniel Castro, and Owlsley. You'll be able to find links to their work once we build the site out a little bit more. Should be next week. We'll see you next time on Let's Talk Bitcoin.